Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkaj. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers contest. Oh, not contest. Podcast.
Are we having a contest? Awesome.
Well, you know what? I've got my book coming out, and so maybe I've got contest on my brain. I don't know what it is. It's also Friday afternoon. I've been talking to people all day. But we have Karen Martel, who's making fun of me from the other end. She is a certified hormone specialist and transformational nutrition coach. And we're going to talk about estrogen dominance. And I think it's probably better coming from her than it is from me, because I don't think I've ever experienced estrogen dominance quite the way that maybe a female could. And I know that's kind of where now we're getting into sticky pronouns and all kinds of stuff, but I don't care. So if you are struggling with estrogen dominance, or you wanted some more information on estrogen dominance, we should be able to get through it today. We're going to talk about that, maybe the connection with thyroid physiology. It's really not uncommon that somebody who's got thyroid issues is going to have problems with estrogen production, estrogen metabolism. And there's a huge link as people get older and they lose their estrogen output, that they start to have a lot of hypothyroid symptoms, tiredness, fatigue, because estrogen helps run the mitochondria, the little engines inside your cells. So there's a lot to estrogen. We're going to do a lot to talk about estrogen dominance and its connection, and first,
estrogen depletion too.
And estrogen depletion, absolutely. But first, before we do that, we've got to introduce Karen. How are you today?
I'm really good, Eric. It's a Friday. It's the end of the week. We're going to be done after this for our weekend.
Absolutely.
Good Lord. Yeah.
So do us a favor. Tell the listeners a little bit about you, what you do, how'd you get into what you're doing?
Yeah. So my journey started, of course, after having children, my first child specifically, and then again, after my second child, it happened again, where my hormones went really crazy after having kids, after being pregnant. I've got some theories as to why, but it was like it started up the hypothyroidism, which is quite common in women, right, from pregnancy. So after having the baby, I started gaining a bunch of weight and was doing everything I was told to do. I was exercising like crazy, eating very little, calorie counting, trying every diet under the sun. And I just kept gaining weight. And I had digestive issues out of nowhere where I would look like I was 3 months pregnant. I was having severe PMS. I would have severe menstrual migraines that would last 10 days at a time. I couldn't sleep. And this was all like overnight, chronic insomnia, couldn't sleep at all, had all these issues, went to the doctor, was given an antidepressant, was given sleeping pills and told to carry on. And I was 33 at this time. So no doctor would have said, oh, maybe it's your hormones. And I ended up going to a friend of mine who was a naturopath who finally tested my hormones for me. And later on, actually was the only person who finally did a full thyroid panel on me. And I discovered that, I've got high estrogen, I had low progesterone, I had low cortisol, low DHEA, and I wasn't converting T4 to T3 properly. So I was very hypothyroid, gaining all this weight. And I had to go on that journey of discovering for myself what was the root cause of all of this. And in the beginning with the thyroid problems, I did what every woman does and every man, I guess, too. But I was so excited to just have the answer and go on medication. I was thrilled. I didn't know what I know today. So I was like, bring it on, bring on the medication. And he had even tested my reverse T3, which was great, but he didn't understand reverse T3. So on I went to the desiccated thyroid, thinking I was doing everything right. Felt better than I'd ever felt in my entire life. I was suddenly losing weight effortlessly. All these weird symptoms went away. I was feeling better than I ever had. And that lasted about 6 months. And then I don't know if you swear, but all shit hit the fan, basically, Eric. And I got the most hypothyroid I'd ever been in 30 days. It was 10 pounds in 30 days came on. I couldn't get off my couch. I was severely depressed, head fog, like there was no tomorrow. It was the worst I had ever felt. And I was going, what the hell just happened to me? And I went back and I said, I want you to retest my reverse T3. And in that 6-month time, it had gone from 15 to 20, which is still in range. The top of the range is 24 in Canada. And that was all it took for my system to just like shut down on me, and I was so sick, and I had all of these weird symptoms for months on end. Tried, high doses of T3, felt absolutely nothing, was put on Cortef, was, put on a boatload of supplements. Nothing helped. It was time. And then it was me going, I have to figure out why the hell this is happening. And I started to do my own research and dig in and decide, okay, I'm going to just start going through the list of things and start getting, okay, I'm going to do mold testing. I'm going to do gut testing. I'm going to do heavy metal testing. And lo and behold, I was riddled with heavy metals, which I think most people are these days, but I had off the charts, as high as it could go, lead and mercury. And I believe that that's probably a big reason for the hypothyroidism. So I've been working on that since. But it's all of this kind of combined over the last 10 years drove me to realize how many women are out there doing the right thing. They're eating right, they're healthy, they're exercising, they're taking the supplements, and yet they're still gaining weight and they're still having problems because of their hormones. And so I just went on a deep dive for the last 5 years into hormones and got my certified hormone specialist coaching. And it's history now.
So who was Karen Martel before this? I mean, did you have a background in chemistry and functional medicine or nutrition?
I actually did body work.
So you were
I was a rolfer.
It's the second time I talked about Rolf today. How about
that?
No,
yes. Really? Yeah. Yes, I know you're a chiropractor. So Rolfing and chiropractic go so nicely together. But yeah, I was a rolfer for 17 years. So I did a lot of body work. And in that time, at the end of my career with that, it was like, I could put my hands on somebody and know if they were eating something that they were sensitive to, or if they were inflamed, the emotional stuff, the weight gain stuff. And so I was sitting there counseling people, all my clients, on nutrition for their body. And it pulled me in that direction. And I just finally decided, okay, I'm going to become a nutritionist. And then I started getting pulled into the hormone thing and just went from there.
So I think one of the things that happens when we're new into kind of the chemistry and the functional medicine stuff, and you go to your first conference and seminar and somebody says, hey, here's what's wrong. Here's the protocol to fix it. You walk away from that seminar because the whole goal is, right, I'm going to give you the protocol and you're going to fix people on Monday. And you go, all right. And then you start doing that kind of canned protocol with your clients and you go, well, this doesn't work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's not fair to say. So it does work. I say it helps the healthy sick people because a simple protocol usually works really well. If you're a pretty relatively healthy person, you do a gut protocol, or you get rid of your carbohydrates. Hey, I notice a difference. But when you start seeing more chronically ill people, those simple protocols we learn, which are great foundational things, they don't work so well. And somebody's probably already done them 3 times already. And that's when that's when the skill set of really kind of understanding the mechanisms and physiology based on what data we have today can really be helpful, because you start to say, okay, all right, that didn't work. Now we need to understand why it didn't work. And sometimes people think that when they do a support protocol and doesn't work out well, that it's a failure. And it's not really a failure, because what we do is, if we're astute, we can start to learn from that and go, okay, why did this support that we provided that should have worked on paper, why didn't it work? And that might give us a clue as to, okay, since that didn't work, here's the other mechanism that might be a better way to help support this person. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. And it was a very hard journey in that sense, because there's not a lot of information, good information on the hormonal system. Like, it's really hard to find solid information that isn't, based on old facts. We don't have a ton of information on bioidentical hormones. A lot of it's based on the old hormone system and, Premarin and progestins. And so for me, it was years of digging into the research to really understand what was happening with the female hormonal system and why is it that we're being so affected now. And, these women are suffering so much when they're trying so hard to do everything right. And those are the women that I was really geared to helping because they were like myself, where I was doing what I was told to do. I was eating right. I was taking the supplements. I was doing the protocols. And it wasn't working. I had to go deeper and really get to the bottom of what was happening. And I see that happening time and time again with women. It's not quick fix. You can't just slap on the hormones and go on your merry way. Some women that works for, but a lot of women it doesn't because our bodies aren't in the state that they used to be even 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We've really changed. Our environment has changed immensely, and it's really affecting the hormones.
I think there's two important things that I want to kind of emphasize there. One is, as you're aging, your hormone physiology changes, right? So I know in today's world, we talk, everybody wants to be on hormone replacement therapy because they want to have the sex hormones of like a 20-year-old, but the physiology may not be capable of dealing with that, A. Two, most of the people that are struggling, this is, I'll say in my opinion, I'll let you comment on it, is that we assume that physiology works the same in homeostasis, a low stress state, as it does in allostasis, which is a high stress state. And the reality is physiology doesn't work the same in those two states. So, you take estrogen, you say, hey, I want estrogen to do this, but if I'm in danger mode, I'm not probably going to use that treatment that's intended to do what I want it to do. It's probably not going to do what I want it to do. It's going to do what's best for the cells, for the tissue. So same thing with thyroid physiology. We say, hey, I'm going to give you thyroid hormone and it's going to convert to T3. Well, not if the cell doesn't want a higher state of metabolism. The cell is going to say, no, we're going to deactivate it and we're going to have a low T3 state. You may say, oh, the cell's broken. No, the cell's not broken. The cell's in stress. It doesn't want to increase its metabolism. It's trying to deactivate its metabolism. It's trying to slow globally, maybe trying to slow down the metabolism of the physiology. And what do we keep doing? We just keep loading more thyroid hormone into the system and think that if a little didn't work, then a lot will work. That'll work. And it just doesn't work. And so many clients that you see, that I see, have been down that road. And then when T4 doesn't work, then they go to T3 and they go, oh, there it goes. Now I feel good. I got some T3, until the body goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're just trying to get rid of this T4. Now you're dumping T3 in here. Now we got to put a lot of energy into deactivating the T3 too. Oh my gosh. So almost every time you change your thyroid medication, you get that honeymoon period and then it goes away. And then I see a lot of what happened to you, which is I got to a certain dose of T3 medication and now that's not working anymore. And I'm more hypothyroid than ever. And that, to me, that just really kind of confirms the whole concepts I talk about in my book that's coming out. It will be out by the time this podcast is out, but I talk about that in the thyroid debacle. Like, this is one of the things that happens is that it's not just about dumping in more thyroid hormone into the system. It's automatically going to work. It's really up to the cells to determine what they want to do with it. And they ultimately have control, much like sex hormones, adrenal hormones, all this stuff. We look at what's in the blood often. We're not paying attention to what's happening at the cellular level. And we assume if we just put more stuff in the gas tank, it's got to work. Like, just put more estrogen in, it's going to work. Put more androgen in, it's going to work. We're going to put more cortisol, it's going to work. And so we always think if we can raise or lower what's in the bloodstream, that automatically means that it's going to work at the tissue level. And it just doesn't. It would be nice if it would be nice if it did.
And for some women, it does. Like, if they're in menopause and they're suffering, and some women can, there's probably 50% of women can go get put on hormones and they're like, great, I feel freaking amazing, and carry on. But there's this large set of women that it doesn't work like that because they haven't prepared their body for it. And their body does need those hormones when they've aged and they're no longer producing them. But if you're not dealing with your cortisol levels, it's the same thing with the thyroid as it is with your sex hormones, where if you're in this state of, fight or flight constantly, or you're burned out or whatever it might be with your cortisol, too high, too low, that will affect how your body takes in those hormones. And your body is supposed to, once the ovaries shut down, it's supposed to go into the adrenal system, and the adrenal system is supposed to take over some of the production of those hormones. But if you're in a fight or flight state and you're constantly pumping out that cortisol, your body will preferentiate going to that cortisol rather than making sex hormones, because cortisol is a survival hormone. Your other hormones, you can live without those. It doesn't. So your body's going to go, okay, we need to make cortisol. We put these on the back burner for now. And your body will do that. It will take away from it, and it will make it so that your body can't take in those hormones the way it should. And you can get adverse side effects and actually gain weight. So it has to be, you have to look at all of these things, like the big picture, before you do the hormones. And, and if you're fertile, there's so much you can do without the hormones first that needs to be done, and look at the big picture.
I think for most people, as we get older, the body is designed to run on lower loads of sex hormones, and we make the assumption that we need the same level or the same dose, but we probably don't, because especially for women, they're not pumping out children usually in their 60s and 70s unless they're trying to get on like Star Magazine at the grocery store, right? So is the same demand or need may not be there. So we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily like, hey, we just have to force more stuff in because the body can't make it anymore. The body's designed to run on a little bit lower levels as we get older, because the needs of the body are different. We're not producing eggs, we're not producing babies. So the need and the quantity of hormone we need changes, and that's normal. And so instead of saying, well, we just need more, what we have to do as good physicians is say, okay, why is the amount that the body is supposed to run on that may already be here not regulating and working and metabolizing appropriately? That's really what we should be doing from a functional standpoint, to help our clients out. They may need some because they're not producing it for different reasons, but we really do truly need to have a better understanding of why is the body not being able to be self-sufficient. And there's usually a reason for it. And the primary reason that I think is because their physiology is too focused on cell defense and less focused on manufacturing. Hey, life is good, let's make sex hormones, and more focused on, hey, what do I have to protect myself from? So let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about today, and that's estrogen dominance. So first of all, I think what we need to do is let's have you kind of give maybe a definition of what estrogen dominance is, and then we'll get into maybe what are some of the causes of estrogen dominance. So let's start with, what is estrogen dominance?
And I will say right now, most women think they actually have estrogen dominance. Every woman I work with seems to be on D-indolmethane and trying to clear out estrogen because they relate to the symptoms of estrogen dominance, right? Weight gain in the hips and the butt and the stomach, maybe heavy periods, sore breasts. And I have a blog post actually on my website. I have like over 400 blog posts. My estrogen dominant post is the most visited webpage on my website. So it is a hot topic. It's a buzzword that, okay, everybody's estrogen dominant. And the truth of the matter is, I do Dutch testing and hormone testing all day long. I've seen thousands of them. Very few women are actually producing way too much estrogen. So there's different degrees of estrogen dominance. There's one that is truly your estrogen's super high, and it's like off the charts high. You're getting all these symptoms. Okay. Then there's the most common one is when estrogen's actually completely normal level and the progesterone is too low in comparison to the estrogens. And then that's going to give you estrogen dominant symptoms, but you don't want to be sapping your estrogen, especially if you're in your 40s and you're perimenopausal. Trust me, you want your estrogen during this time, because without it, you run into way more problems than you do with that little amount of progesterone. But women will typically start to lose about 75% of their progesterone when they're in perimenopause. Estrogen stays pretty even, and then it'll start to do this kind of roller coaster ride towards the end, where you can have some high levels, some days of low levels. But point being is, most of estrogen dominance is not that you have too much estrogen. And then it comes down to, where in the pathway of that breakdown are you stuck? And nobody's looking at that. Everybody's just handing out DIM, like it's candy. You can see it in all these estrogen detox supplements. And we know that over 100 milligrams of DIM can be really bad for you. It can actually block the androgen receptor, so it can lower your testosterone. It doesn't seem to work the same way if you go over 100 milligrams. So you've got to be really careful. And we can, talk about what else you can do about that. But it's safe to say you have to really discover what kind of estrogen dominance you have. Which of the metabolites are you stuck, if at all? Because there's 3 different metabolites we look at for estrogen. And you have to say, okay, if they're metabolizing all the estrogen and totally fine, maybe then it's methylation. So that's the last little phase. Or are they not pooping it out and they're recirculating their estrogen? Or if somebody has completely great labs, but yet they have all these estrogen dominant symptoms, likely they're xenoestrogen dominant, which is huge right now. I think we all have some degree, men and women, of xenoestrogen dominance. And xenoestrogens, which are the environmental estrogens, the chemicals in our environment that act like estrogen in the body, your body will take in that xenoestrogen before it takes your own production of estrogen in. In that, when I'm saying in, I mean into the cell to work as it's like have its estrogenic activity within the cell. So your body is going to take in these chemical estrogens, which are so much more strong, and they do not act the same way as our own estrogen. And that a lot of the time can be giving women the estrogen dominant symptoms that they're feeling.
Despite having what appears to be normal
labs. Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about, we talked about estrogen dominance, and I agree with you. It's rare that I see a woman with super high estrogen, at least primary estrogens, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to get too deep into it, but there's different ways to look at estrogen, right? There's typically, you can look at it, there's a couple different ways. You can look at it blood,
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it via urine, and I've even seen, and some people actually look at it even in saliva. I think there's a couple labs that actually look at it. So maybe we can go into that a little bit. What's the benefit of looking at blood estrogens? What's pros and cons of just looking at blood, pros and cons of just looking at saliva, pros and cons of looking at just urine?
Yeah. So when it comes to the blood levels, you're looking at bound levels of hormones when you're looking at blood. And I know Eric's talked about this before in his podcast. We want to see what's free and available for the body to be able to use. And so if it's bound, it means it's bound to a protein. I say it's like a bus that's shuttling around your hormones all over your body. And that hormone's got to get off the bus, get into the receptor and into the cell. So looking at blood values, A, that's all the doctors will do. B, they won't tell you what day to take it on. So your hormones as a female are going up and down through your entire cycle. So you really want to get it on a certain day. And then the lab values are like, oh, if you're between 150 and 2000 on your estrogen marker, you're fine. And you can fall anywhere in there and a doctor's going to tell you don't have a problem with your hormones. Or if you're in menopause and your hormones come back, non-existent, they'll still tell you it's normal because it's normal for your age not to have those hormones in their eyes. So you have to be very careful. So as a fertile cycling woman that's even in perimenopause, that might be getting an irregular period, you really don't want to base labs on blood. I always get women to do the blood work, but they also need to do it with either a saliva test, which is going to test free available hormones, or the urine metabolite test, which is going to tell you an idea of how much free hormones you have, but how your body's breaking those hormones down. If you're in menopause and you haven't had your hormones for a couple of years and you don't have a period, blood values can be a lot more accurate because you just don't have bound, you don't got unbound. So it's definitely more, you could do serum if you're in menopause, if you don't want to spend the money on those other tests. And also I have a lot of women that do the Dutch test in menopause, and you can't really see how they're breaking it down because you want to wait till they're actually on the estrogen replacement. Then you do the Dutch and you can see how they're breaking it down, because some women, they don't have any. So then you can't see how it's being broken down. But so it's still of a value because it tells you a lot more than just estrogen, but it's, it's a little bit trickier. But yeah. And then if you're on hormone replacement, you can't do saliva because it's not accurate. It overshows in saliva. And then a lot of them will undershow in blood work. So for the menopausal woman, you have to kind of take that into account. You can't be doing saliva. Saliva is a great option because it's going to test free levels. It's the gold standard, I feel, for cortisol, but it doesn't tell you the metabolites. And that's such an important picture, especially if you're getting those estrogen dominant symptoms.
So we talk about taking a look at it. When we're looking at, let's talk estrogen because we're focused on estrogen dominance. As a cycling female, right, you're going to have 3 primary estrogens, right? And so can you explain those 3 estrogens, what those are and what each of them means, and maybe what the significance of each one is?
Yeah. And a lot of the dominance, I'll tell you this first, there's 2 main estrogen receptors. So that's what's going to be taking that hormone into the cell. There's alpha and there's beta. Alpha is exactly what it sounds like. It's the alpha dog. It's stronger. It has more estrogen signaling. So there's 3 types of estrogen. There's estrone, estradiol, and estriol. There's actually like 30 to 60, they say, of actual estrogens in our body, but those are the 3 main ones that we're going to talk about here today. So estrone acts about 60 to 65% on the alpha receptor. And it's like the medium of the 3 estrogens, of the 3 amigos, I like to call them. And it can be produced out of aromatization from testosterone or DHEA, but it's mostly made actually within your fat cells. And so when women go through menopause, one of the biggest complaints is I gained weight and it's all in my belly, the menobelly. Every woman hates the menobelly for good reason, but it's your body compensating for the low estrogen. It's smart. It says, God, we need this estrogen. Estrogen is needed for every single organ in your body to function right. It is so important for female health. The body goes, I got to make some estrogen some way, somehow. And estrone and estradiol, which is the main female estrogen, can convert back and forth to each other. So your body will put fat on to make some estrone so that you get some estrogen. But unfortunately, that estrone tends to be a little more inflammatory, and it is primarily going to sit on the alpha estrogen receptor. Then there's estradiol. This is the one that it's like the mother of all hormones. This is the one we want. We don't want to be clearing it out like crazy because it is the most important hormone for the female body. It runs everything. So estradiol is the one that we're going to produce in our ovaries out of testosterone. It's the one responsible for fertility, for our cycle. It is all estrogens are a growth hormone. It's going to act about 50-50 between alpha and beta receptors, which is great. We need some of both. And so this is we want that. We want it to be going to both of those receptors. Then there's estriol. Estriol is the weakest out of those estrogens. It is mostly produced when a woman is pregnant. And it is about 1,000 times more present in vagina tissue than the other 2. And it will only bind to the beta receptors, but it doesn't sit for long. It goes really fast. So it gets on that receptor, but it gets right back off. So it has very weak estrogen signaling. A lot of people will do like a bias when they're in menopause, which is a combination of both estradiol and estriol, because estriol is supposed to be very breast protective, helps with your immune system, and then helps with that vaginal atrophy that can happen for a lot of women, or just that lack of lubrication. So that can be really helpful. So those are the 3 main estrogens, and then they break down into metabolites from there.
Great. Sorry, I had a dog barking. I was trying to shut the volume off. So, all right. So we got the primary estrogens. We got different receptors. there's also primary metabolites. So let's talk about the primary metabolites. And we see these on a test like the Dutch test. We're not going to see those on a blood test, right?
No.
We're not going to see those necessarily on a salivary
You won't see them
test.
Anywhere. But
so the
urine.
only place we're going to see them is on urine. So let's talk about the metabolites and see what's going on there.
Yeah. So there's 3 main metabolites. There's 2-OH, 4-OH, and 16-OH. 2-OH is the preferred pathway that we want the estrogens to be going down because it's the safest out of all the pathways. The 4-OH is the most toxic of the pathways and has been shown to increase your risk. If it's too high, if you're going down that pathway, it can increase your risk of breast cancer. And then there's the 16-OH, which is kind of an in-between. It's got some good to it. It's got some bad to it. It's very proliferative 16-OH, which is good for things like your bones, but not so good if you've got breast cancer because it can make it grow, basically. So it can have some DNA damage to it. So does the 4-OH. You want some of all of them. There is some research that shows, for instance, like 4-OH has something to do with something positive with the brain action. So they do have, and then, like I said, it can help with your bones. And so you don't want none, but you want to have this nice balance between the 3 so that you're preferring that 2-OH pathway. You've got a little 4-OH and you've got a little 16-OH. And when you do the Dutch test, you can see on this little pie graph, which of these pathways your body's going to prefer to go down. And then you can actually really dial in that estrogen dominance or those symptoms that a person's feeling, because you can look at these 3 pathways and there's certain things that you can take that will help you go down the better pathway over the 2 more toxic pathways. And then under that, we go into phase 2, which is methylation and glucuronidation. So your body's then going to kind of take it, wrap it up, and get it out of the system. And so you have to also look at how is your body methylating? Does somebody have the MTHFR gene? A lot of like gene stuff comes into this as well, into the detoxification of estrogen. And, going back to kind of what you were talking about before is, some people, they feel they may need to load up on hormones, but actually a lot of it comes down to genetics once you get into hormone replacement, because some of us are very estrogenic. And so when we start to lose our estrogen, we could have a lot more symptoms than, let's say, the woman that's more androgenic with her genetics. And so if she loses her testosterone, she's going to really feel it compared to the woman that's more estrogenic. And so the women that are more estrogenic, they may get a lot of symptoms really early on, even though they're normal, their labs look normal. This happened to me, where I was getting hot flashes and night sweats, but yet I had totally fine estrogen levels. But you look at my genetics, I'm an estrogen dominant person. My body likes estrogen. So it needs it to be at a certain amount. And so you can see how complex this gets as you start to dive into it farther. So I just really want people to understand it's not as easy as just throw in some supplements and call it a day. You can't. You have to be really, really careful about what you're taking for these different estrogen dominant symptoms.
So when we think about estrogen dominance, and let's say we're looking at a Dutch test and we're looking at, let's say, the primary hormones, and you're looking, I have a patient who thinks they have estrogen dominance. You're going to look at the ratio of estradiol and your progesterone and kind of get an idea of maybe if those 2 things are out of balance.
Yep.
If a person's did a Dutch and they don't know what they're looking at necessarily, but they've got this and they're going, okay, let me look at my Dutch and see, did I have a pattern of estrogen dominance? They're going to look for progesterone. Which one of those estrogens do you try and have them focus on as the one that's maybe potentially going to drive the imbalance? Is it E1? Is it E2? Is it E3? Or is it potentially a combination of those?
It typically is a combination, because when women have that true estrogen dominance where they have too much estrogen, I will almost always see at least E1 and E2 elevated together. And remember, those 2 go back and forth. They can convert into each other. Sometimes I'll see that estriol might be normal or estriol might be high and compared to the other two. So that one doesn't always line up, but I definitely find that E1 and E2, if there's really estrogen dominance, those two can be elevated. They seem to go together. I will see a lot of menopausal women though that will lose estradiol and estriol, but they'll still be producing some estrone, and they tend to be overweight a lot of the time, because remember, we can make estrone from our fat cells. So it can make the estrone, and then the estrone actually can put weight on the woman. So it's this vicious cycle of kind of more fat means more estrone means more fat. And it just keeps going.
So if you have somebody who is got lower primary E1 and E2, and they've got high E3 and they're not pregnant, what are you thinking?
Yeah, that doesn't happen too often, but I have seen it where they have normal levels of estriol. And I'm like, why is that? But typically, if it's menopausal women, you'll see them, all three of them are low. That's typically what I see. I have seen that variation, but I'm not sure, because those two, estrone, estradiol, they all convert down into the estriol. So where that's coming from, it would have to be that small amount that those two are producing, and it's just converting down into enough estriol that's going to show up on a test.
So is there one, two, or three of the metabolites, phase 1 metabolites, that somebody might also need to consider that might be a trigger of creating some level of estrogen dominance?
100%. Yeah. The 16-OH and the 4-OH are going to predominantly act on as a more estrogenic compound. And so you will be more estrogenic. And so it can happen in the metabolites. You could have normal levels of that E1, E2, E3, but then you have really high levels of 4-OH and 16-OH and low levels of 2-OH. And that's when it gets really tricky, because you got to be careful using the DIM, especially on a perimenopausal woman. If she's got normal E1, E2, E3, but high 4-OH and 16-OH, now we're getting into some sticky waters, because DIM works so well for bringing out of the 4-OH and 16-OH and making it go down the 2-OH pathway. Great, that's what we want. But overuse will start to drain the estrogen, which we don't want. So there's different things that you can take. Like I find things like the glutathione is part of that detox pathway. Taking things like calcium D-glucarate in combination with DIM is really important, because DIM is going to help package it up and get it out of those metabolites. But then we need to also get it out into phase 2 methylation and glucuronidation, which is the calcium D-glucarate comes in and helps with that. So it can get a little bit tricky with what you're using. So I'll typically have women maybe do like a 50 to 100 milligrams of DIM for a short period of time, just trying pushing it down that right pathway. But we don't want to go too long, especially if she's in her 40s or 50s. We have to be careful.
So for the listeners, it's one of the reasons I led Karen on that path is because if the metabolites, those phase 1 metabolites, are elevated and can trigger estrogen dominant symptoms, and you only get a blood panel done, the blood panel is only going to show the primary hormones. So if you could look normal or low on the blood values, somebody might say, well, I know you have those symptoms, but really you have estrogen deficiency, provide you with medication, and that could exacerbate these estrogen 100%. Dominant symptoms. And they may look at it and go, well, it can't be that, because you had low levels of estrogen, but because they don't know what's going on from a detoxification pathway, they're not aware that phase 1 or phase 2 or 2.5 or phase 3 metabolism may be jacked up or backed up. And so you're getting this hormone, it's metabolizing and it's maybe getting stuck in the system, and it's resulting in these estrogen dominant symptoms that it just aren't going to be apparent maybe on a general blood chemistry. Is that correct?
Oh my God, it's so spot on. Exactly. And we'll hear this all the time where women are put on estrogen replacement. I even just saw a hormone practitioner here in Canada. She's a nurse practitioner, and she, when I went to her, because you can't get testosterone replacement very easily here. You have to you can't get it through a naturopath. So I typically usually see a functional doctor for my prescriptions, but I had to go get testosterone. So I see this woman, and what does she do? She just runs blood work. And this is all she does for a living, is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And I just was like, oh, I just was like cringed inside, because I'm like, you're just slapping on high amounts of all these hormones to these women. And then these women are coming back going, I just put on 10 pounds in a month since I started estrogen. Why is that? And then these doctors are going, well, it can't be that. You're just, hormones can't make you gain weight. That's not the problem. You have no estrogen. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't look to see how that person's breaking it down. Because if they're preferring that 4OH pathway, they could be really toxic. They're recirculating, and maybe they've got really bad gut dysbiosis. And if that's the case, or if they're constipated, that estrogen is going to start to recirculate. If you're drinking all the time, your body's going to have to be processing that alcohol first, which again, then the hormones are going to start to recirculate. Your body's not going to be metabolizing them the way it should be. So you really have to look at this big picture, because then these women are going to throw in the towel and be like, well, I'm not going to use estrogen. It's making me fat. But yet estrogen is vital to our health and to longevity for women. I mean, we just had a study came out last year in Arizona that showed that women that replaced estrogen transdermally, bioidentical, for 6 years or longer had a decrease in developing Alzheimer's and dementia by 75%. That is huge. So you don't not want your estrogen. You want to just see that you get the whole picture and prepare the body properly for those hormones when they're needed in menopause.
So somebody can replace estrogen. There's another question to ask, and I think we see it. I think physicians are doing a better job now of kind of providing a few different hormones when they're doing hormone replacement therapy versus just estrogen, right? So when somebody's typically getting hormone replacement therapy, is the standard that you see, right? I think we would both say it's based on the individual, but you typically what I see now, actually I just saw it the other day where somebody just got estrogen and progesterone. And when I looked at the Dutch test that the same physician had run, interestingly, and their androgens were tanked. There's no androgens in the system. So I'm like, well, we should be asking a bigger question here, like, why are we not making it, right? And if androgens are low and you're going to support estrogen and progesterone, why wouldn't we at least support the androgens as well, right? Because androgens are important. So maybe we should have a little discussion on the production of hormones, like where are the hormones primarily made, like in the cell? What's the used to make it? Why would androgens even be important for a female, right? Especially in the later stage of life, right? So can you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, because testosterone is given out to men like it's candy. There's testosterone clinics all over North America. It's like, you want your testosterone? Oh, hell yeah, here you go. Pharmaceutical companies make it, but they do not make it for women. And so for women, it can be really challenging to get. And like I said, like I had to seek somebody out. It took me years to find somebody in Canada that could prescribe testosterone to me, or that would, I think is really the thing, because any doctor can, but it's very hard to get. And then the other problem is a doctor will see that a woman doesn't have her uterus and then say that progesterone is not necessary. If you're suffering, well, we're just going to put you on estrogen. You don't need progesterone because you don't have a uterus. Because progesterone counteracts the growth of estrogen in the uterus. So they think, well, what's the point of having progesterone if you've got no uterus? But ladies, estrogen, once again, is a growth hormone, which means if you have breast cancer cells in your breasts, it could go there and make it grow. It's not going to be the cause, but it can make it grow. But guess what? If you take progesterone, it will counteract that and be very breast protective. And the studies show that. There's research, really good research, that shows how protective progesterone is of breast tissue. It's also really good for the myelin sheaths in your brain. It can be also great for the bones, great for metabolism, great for thyroid function. So you need that. Also, there's doctors out there. I actually interviewed one on my podcast who says use progesterone all day long, every day, 250 to 300 milligrams, men, women, children, everybody, every single day, all day long. Guess what? You're going to run into a lot of problems. Mother Nature produces these hormones for a reason in a certain way, and we shouldn't mess with that. What do you want to say, Eric?
I may have had the same person request an interview on my podcast, and we did the podcast. It's a little cantankerous and combative because at least this person, I'm not sure if it's the same person or not. We won't necessarily mention names, but their solution to everything was just everybody should just take progesterone. And I'm like, okay, but why are they not making progesterone? I don't know, but I know it helps. Okay. So what you can explain, let's talk about mechanisms of action. And that didn't go over very well, right? So the solution was everybody just needs more progesterone. And I think and I tried to explain to them, like, listen, you're an MD and I get it. You've seen benefit, but you're talking to somebody in functional medicine, and that's not what we do, is just blindly add another hormone. We're trying to understand mechanisms, and sometimes we want to provide hormones because the body's not making them for whatever reason. We need to give some temporary support, or we need to balance something out. We're giving extra estrogen, and estrogen's typically always balanced by progesterone. So we need to provide a little bit more. If we're going to give the estrogen that's higher than what the progesterone would typically be in somebody in their 50s or 60s, then we need to support that progesterone to match the estrogen we're providing. So yeah, that didn't, it was, I'm still a bit debating. It's the next podcast. It's me interesting. It's the next one to be released, but it'll be interesting. But I'm going to release it because I think that discussion needs to be out there, right? So
yeah. And I've had people that have come back to say that they followed that protocol and they actually saw, like, on their CGM, their continuous blood glucose monitor, how much it helped with their blood sugar spikes. Because he also says to take a couple pumps before every meal. And so you can do that, and it can help with that blood sugar response. And it can help with so many great things. But guess what? Progesterone is going to downregulate estrogen. And estrogen is needed to make and upregulate progesterone receptors. So if you're saturating your body with progesterone every single day, that's going to tank the estrogen. And then you won't even be able to get the progesterone anymore because estrogen's needed to upregulate those receptors. So they all work in this very fine balance together. You have to be very careful. We also naturally only produce progesterone for the second half of our cycle. And so a lot of doctors are putting estrogen, progesterone together all day long, every day. And it's like, well, do we really want to do that? Like, we really should be copying Mother Nature. She knows what's best. She's been doing it a lot longer than we have. So paying attention to that, I think, is really important. And all of the hormones, insulin, thyroid, all of these things can be impacted by choosing which hormones we're going to be using, right? So if you're just using one hormone and you're using it in high amounts, what's that doing? What chain reaction is that causing to all of the other hormones in your body that are so important? So it can make everything dysregulate and get everything out of balance even farther. If you're doing that, if you're just willy-nillying it and going, oh, I'm just going to go buy this progesterone over the counter and just start slapping my body in it all day long and bathing in it. It's not the way to go.
It's an allopathic approach with just a different drug. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make when we did the podcast. Like, listen, I get it. It's helpful. A lot of people use it, they can get benefit for it, but all we're really doing is kicking the can down the road. And if we haven't addressed the real issue that caused the problem to begin with, and we just take that, not only did we not fix the original problem, but we may be actually contributing to another problem, which you just mentioned. And so, ultimately the end of the conversation was, hey, I'm trying to help people with acute symptoms. I get it. Then that's what we should say.
Yes.
We shouldn't say, hey, this is the cure for all these issues, because it's not a cure. Because that's what the early part of the conversation, like, I've cured. I'm like, okay, so explain to me what you cured, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, so they take it for a week and they're cured? Do they take it for a couple? No, they have to take it forever. Okay, then you didn't cure anything. I said, and I pointed out this, you're an allopathic physician and you're working in a model that's different from what we're working. You think that managing a condition is the same thing with curing a condition, and that is two different things. And so it'll be interesting. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. That'll be fun to listen to. But so let's talk about we talk about estrogen. You talked about symptoms. We talked about, hey, we need to get it. We need to metabolize it appropriately. Most of the metabolism of your estrogens occurs where?
Most of the metabolism will occur, well, it's going to occur in the liver. The gut is probably the two most primary places that you're going to be looking at, are those two.
So when we talk about the big areas of metabolism, we talk about liver as phase 1, phase 2, and really there's I guess phase 0, which is we have to get those metabolites to the liver, into the liver. They go through phase 1, and we talk about glucuronidation, or converting those things from kind of metabolite, right, into this fat soluble hormone, right, through different processes, these phase 1 processes. And then we go to phase 2 metabolism, where we convert that fat soluble to water soluble so we can poop or pee it out.
Yeah. So you also have to do that too, right? Like, yeah, there's 3. Yeah.
When we talk about phase 2 Kelly and I will talk about phase 2.5 detox, which is really getting it from the liver into the bile, right? So, because that's really important too. So you have to have good bile flow, good bile function to get it from liver to the gut. And then in the gut, we call that phase 3, which is where you poop the stuff out. And there are, as you said, there's some bacteria in the GI tract that can make enzymes that could cause those metabolites to circle back into the system, right?
Yeah, beta-glucuronidase. Yeah.
So is there specific indicators that somebody might look at? They think they've got estrogen dominant symptoms. They're thinking maybe I've got a problem with detoxification. What things on their blood work might give them a clue that they have some problems with liver function, detoxification? Could you think of a couple markers that might make sense?
Liver enzymes, of course. I always look at people's their CBC panel just to get a good idea of, is there, with their differentials, you're going to look at the neutrophils, the lymphocytes, the monocytes, the eosinophils. That can tell you if there's a gut problem. Like if they've got elevated eosinophils or basophils, it can sometimes indicate that there's either a parasitic infection or a food sensitivity. I'll look at, total protein levels. I'll look at bun levels. I'll look at all of these different markers to see, is there a digestive problem? Is there maybe a problem with the kidneys, with the liver and the liver enzymes? Some of the time it doesn't show up in there. Like people could have really healthy looking liver enzymes. It looks great. And then you go to their Dutch test and it looks terrible how they're breaking it down in phase 1 or phase 2. So you can certainly get a lot from that, just simple basic blood work, and I make everybody do it to get a bigger picture of everything. And sometimes we can pick up stuff like maybe they've got a viral infection, maybe they got SIBO, and that's going to show up in the neutrophils or in their white blood cell count, that they're fighting something. And then you can kind of from there explore farther and kind of dig a little bit deeper. But nothing shows you what the Dutch does.
Yeah. So I'll add to that.
Yeah, add to that, please.
I would tell people that if you're looking at general chemistries and wondering, well, I think I've got estrogen dominance. Could I possibly? A couple of things to look at. Obviously, look at your thyroid panel. And if you have lower levels of total T3 or free T3, there's a good indication that you're not converting T4 to T3, and you may have a level of tissue hypothyroidism. And I talk about this all the time on the podcast. The peripheral tissues do most of the conversion of T4 to T3. And so if you have a low T3 state at the liver, you're going to have reduced mitochondrial function. You're going to have reduced detoxification pathways. Okay. So that's one. If you have elevated reverse T3, it's another good indication that maybe there's problems with detoxification for 2 reasons. One, I may have reduced T4 to T3 conversion, and I have something driving more T4 to reverse T3 to T2. So I have tissue hypothyroidism, and most of the reverse T3 gets metabolized at the liver by deiodinase 1, so, and gets metabolized. So if reverse T3 is elevated, I'm thinking, I have cell stress going on that's causing more T4 to reverse T3 conversion? And do I have a problem with the liver not able to get rid of this reverse T3? So that would be another thing to consider. A third thing I would consider is if your cholesterol and LDL are elevated, because to get cholesterol out of the bloodstream and into the liver and into the bile, you have to have sufficient levels of T3 to activate the LDL receptors on the liver to pull the cholesterol out. So the other thing we should be also talk about is what hormone is used to make your sex hormones, right? So another thing that may make you think I got some problems with hormones is I got high or low hormone symptoms and I got high cholesterol, because if you have high cholesterol and it's not going out in the liver, then at least you should be doing is using that to make hormones, right? Wouldn't that be a backup role? Like, hey, I got extra food. I don't need the extra energy so I'm going to drive that to hormone production. And yet my androgens are low, my estrogen's low, my cortisol is low. Well, what's the significance there? Well, that means the cholesterol is not being used to make hormones either. Where are most of the hormones? Like when we take cholesterol and bring it into a cell, especially at the adrenal gland to make cortisol, DHEA, right? What part of the cell is driving that production of cholesterol into the hormone? It's occurring in your mitochondria.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've got a low T3 state, because we looked at that thyroid panel, hey, my cholesterol is elevated, we got to be thinking maybe my DHEA is low, maybe my cortisol is low, because I don't have the ability to take that cholesterol that was in my bloodstream and available for use and pull it into the cell and convert it into what it should be. That should have us start to think again, like, ooh, maybe I got a low T3 state. So I would look at that. I would also consider looking at your triglycerides and your VLDL. Okay, so if those are starting to elevate, that's a good indication that I'm not able, my mitochondria is not working well, my liver's not functioning well to bring those fatty acids into the liver and use it for energy. Your liver can generate energy from glucose, from proteins, and from fats. And if your triglycerides are elevated, that means it's not getting pulled into the liver. It's not being used to make energy in your mitochondria and your liver. And that's another sign that, man, my liver's not functioning really well. And that elevated VLDL is probably elevated because we don't have the ability to pull those fatty acids off of that VLDL, or we're taking the triglycerides that can no longer be used in the liver, stacking those back on LDL and making this VLDL thing that's going to go back out into the body and get stored as fat somewhere else. Elevated triglycerides, elevated VLDL, you're starting to develop fatty liver disease. And as Karen said, what we typically call the liver enzymes, and that are often run AST and ALT, there are a lot of people that have liver issues, that have gallbladder issues, and they look fine. The real liver enzyme that rarely ever gets done is GGT. And that's rare. It rarely gets done, but you can have fatty liver disease developing long before
it'll show up.
Yeah, before it'll show up. So I would say if you're concerned, right, and you're saying what else might show me I have a problem, definitely look at some of those markers we talked about. And the easy thing to also take a look at is, do I have inflammatory markers that are elevated? Now, most regular physicians aren't running inflammatory markers, but if you got inflammation going on, think about this. Inflammation is a danger signal. If you got danger signals, your body's not concerned about your sex hormones. Your body's concerned about making protective, inflammatory hormone cytokines and trying to protect itself. So, and the way I typically I kind of talk about it is, listen, if it's Friday, if you got a big party this weekend and you've got all 4 burners going on in the kitchen, you're vacuuming, you're doing wash, you're doing all those things, and one of your kids sitting at your kitchen island, somebody breaks in and attacks your child, are you going to spend time and attention on cooking, doing wash, vacuuming, right? Taking a nap, having sex. No, you're going to spend all your time and attention on protecting your child. But if somebody walked in, they saw food's burning, vacuum cleaners running, washes all over the place, dishes are dirty, we can make an assumption that you're a terrible, cook, terrible housekeeper, right? Terrible parent, terrible spouse. But that's because we look superficially, right? Same thing with hormones. When we look at them, we see an imbalance in hormones. Instead of just quickly saying, yeah, let's put more in, we have to ask a better question, which is, why is this happening this way?
Yeah.
Right?
And on the flip side of that, everyone, cholesterol can go up and blood sugar can go up when you have when you're losing your hormones, because estrogen is needed for glucose transport. It makes us more insulin sensitive. It affects the hunger centers in our brain. So we start to eat more without the estrogen. Progesterone and estrogen both are really important for insulin sensitivity. And so I see a lot of there's even connection between developing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It goes up in menopausal women because of the loss of hormones. So a lot of those markers, it's same with thyroid, right? Like you got to look at that whole picture, because without your thyroid, is like without your estrogen, you could have insulin resistance because you're missing those hormones, whether it's from age for the estrogen, or it could be from something else, right? So you really have to go, okay, what's happening here? Big picture, all these things work together. They all work synergistically.
Yeah. And it's important we understand that that your estrogen plays a role in mitochondrial function. So without estrogen, mitochondrial capacity goes down. So why would we have insulin resistance as we get into menopause? Well, if we're losing our estrogen, and God forbid we also have low thyroid hormone as well, now you've got mitochondria that don't have anything to drive the metabolism. So you're going to reduce your mitochondrial capacity. So there's less food energy that you can push through and make actual cellular energy. So that's going to cause you to not be able to take as much glucose into the cell. So the cell doesn't need as much. You can't transport this. It's not going to transport in. It's not going to have the capacity to transport it back in. So now you become insulin resistant, right? And so now that glucose stays in the bloodstream and it's got to go somewhere. Where does it go? It goes into fat cells and you get more body fat. Yeah. So estrogen is critically important as we move through life, because it really is important for cellular energy, mitochondrial function, and everything. So
organ function.
Yeah. And we talk about thyroid physiology, like every cell has receptors for thyroid physiology. Like every cell has receptors for all the hormones and neurotransmitters. So we can't, I know we do this sometimes as we talk about individual systems, like I'm a thyroid specialist or I'm a hormone specialist. Most of us who deal with thyroid hormones and sex hormones and adrenal stuff, we talk through lenses of things, but what we really are is good generalists, because I think the person who's really doing functional medicine isn't trying to play whack-a-mole with hormone values in the blood with different types of hormones. What they're really trying to do is say, I got to address root cause. And so that might be an infection, that may be toxicity, that may be compromised detoxification pathways, that may be some other form of cell stress, emotional stuff, trauma. So you can't, when people come to me and say, oh, I want you to tell me how to fix myself because you're the thyroid specialist, I'm like, well, I don't know how to fix you. I don't have a drug to give you, and there's no magic supplement. We have to identify the root issues. And they're like, well, I was just hoping you could tell me what the dose. Do I need T3? Do I need T4? Well, what are you trying to accomplish, right? Are you trying to normalize your blood value with a medication so that you feel better about the value? Or are you trying to improve your cellular health and get rid of your signs and symptoms long-term? Well, I want to get rid of signs and symptoms long-term. Okay, well, then we have to take a 30,000-foot view of what's going on in your health history, your health timeline, all those things. And I think that's a good tell for a lot of people that they haven't put time and attention into what's going on, I'm not blaming anybody, but if they've been to a bunch of physicians and they don't already have a health timeline kind of written out, they probably haven't really had functional medicine yet. Because part of what we do in functional medicine is saying, how did we get here, right? Whatever it is, sex hormone physiology problems, thyroid physiology problems, fatigue, obesity, whatever it is, it didn't occur when we noticed it, right? When it showed up or when we got the diagnosis. It's a chronic condition that's developed over the last couple decades, right? And there's usually clues in that health history, like, okay, back here at 16, when you were having problems with your cycle, like this, you had problems before this, right? And so you didn't do anything to fix this other than take birth control and delay the response. And yeah, you got lucky, you got pregnant, but you're dealing with not the last year or two of hormone issues, but you've had actually hormone regulation issues for 4 decades, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
But in the same breath, I always tell women too, it doesn't actually have to be super complicated either. Some people it is, and you got to get to the root of it. But for a lot of women that are healthy and they're paying attention to all of the things that we've talked about here today, like you're paying attention to your stress levels, you have healthy adrenal system, you've got healthy thyroid, you exercise, you eat well, you're doing all those things that are right. And you goes through menopause, that doesn't, just because you're super healthy, it doesn't mean that you're not going to suffer from the lack of hormones. And at that point, you cannot diet or supplement your way or root cause your way out of no hormones. This is age. Every single one of you are going to lose your hormones. Some of you will be affected more than others. Some of you need to get to the root cause and really look at this big picture, make sure everything's in place. You got a healthy liver, you got healthy cholesterol, you got all of those things you got to pay attention to. But there's still a large percentage of women who are super healthy and that suffer immensely through perimenopause and menopause. And perimenopause can go on for 12 years for some women. Some women feel that they're suicidal, that their marriages will end. They leave their careers because they are suffering so bad. And everyone needs to understand that there is a solution to that you can, for somebody like that, it can be as simple as giving the body the hormones it's needing. Because some of us we suffer more than others, and there is a solution to that.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of having some of these bioidentical hormones available, is that for the person who is doing all the right things and still struggling, and maybe it's got its components to their just the uniqueness of who they are. And we talked about signaling levels and receptor issues and genetics. It gives them an option, and it's also an option for people who are who don't want to put the time and effort into it, but need something to feel better. Not everybody has the desire to work on their diet and their nutrition. And I think that's why we have pharmaceuticals for the people that don't want to put the time and effort into, and they don't have to do it, right? But that's why we have drugs and medications. So, hey, you have high blood pressure, you can change your life and lifestyle, and your blood pressure will probably address itself, or we can manage it, and you can continue to do what you're going to do, and we'll band-aid the next thing that comes up. And there's a lot of people who are like, listen, I want to go on with my life the way I'm doing it now, and I'll kick the can down the road, and that's what I want to do. God bless them. Good for you, right? And there's medications for it. And functional medicine is probably not right for you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we, as functional medicine practitioners, we also have to be aware of what our client wants. So medications are out there. They're not bad things. There's medications that can support people based on what their goals and their desires are. So I think sometimes in allopathic medicine, we assume that people don't want to do the things that are necessary to get themselves healthy without medication. So that's the only solution. And sometimes in functional medicine, we assume that everybody wants to put the hard work in to maintain and manage this physiology that's going to, year after year, get harder to manage and maintain, just like your car, right? It gets harder. It takes more work to keep it running well. It takes more work to get it running well, and to keep it managed. So there's functional medicine for those people who really want to put that time and effort in, or just need a little guidance there. And for those who don't, there are ways to do it with medications. The key is finding somebody who understands the chemistry to make sure that when you're providing these medications, you're aware of more than just putting it in. You're aware of how it works in the system. Much like if I had a car or you came to me with your car and said, hey, my car's not running well. And I just looked at the gas gauge and said, well, it's because it's half full. Right. And I filled the tank up. It's going to be good now. Yeah. That would be like saying, well, the reason you don't feel good is because you don't have that much. Yeah, your hormones are a little low. I'm just going to give you more hormones and that'll fix it. Well, maybe it does, right? If the tank of your car was empty and I put gas in it,
it's going to run.
It's going to run, right? Of course. But
yes. Yeah.
If it doesn't, it did run well with a half a tank of gas, right? If your hormones aren't regulating well when you have like a normal level or low normal level, more isn't necessarily going to make it run better. We have to ask the better question, like, okay, what else is going on here? And I think that's really what we do better in functional medicine, is really take a look at the physiology of beyond the deficiency. What do we need to consider as far as why did maybe we have a deficiency? Is there things we can do to manage it or to correct that? And two, how do we get this thing that we now need to take maybe to make sure it works optimally without creating problems?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So let's do this, because I think we're getting close to an hour and a half. We've talked quite a bit about stuff. I've got about another hour and a half of questions we can talk about, right? But let's talk about what somebody can do or should do. Like, what are the steps if I'm a female and I feel like I've got estrogen dominance? Give me some steps. Like, what should the listeners be thinking about doing? Step 1, step 2, step 3, maybe even before they reach out to a practitioner to help them?
Yeah, I think number one, you clean up your environment. I think that has to be first and foremost, because like I said, we're all bombarded by xenoestrogens. Nobody is exempt from them anymore. They're everywhere. So making sure that you do what you can in your immediate environment, in your households, to get rid of all the artificial scents and the plastics and anything that is a xenoestrogen in your body, that can be a xenoestrogen in the body, you get rid of it as much as you can. And that'll take a lot of the load off from that. Like, huge, can be huge.
So tell people where they're going to find them. Like, because somebody's going like, where in my environment? Like,
I think for women, number one is what you're putting on your skin. You can look at all of these products that are lining every store, every drugstore. You've got the creams, the perfumes, the makeup. All of these things are xenoestrogenic. So those are going to be full of chemicals that are going to act very strongly like estrogen in the body and cause a lot of harm. So getting rid of anything that has an artificial scent to it. I always say that should be number one. And that's easy to pinpoint. It's like you go in, if it's not scented with natural essential oils, gone. Get rid of it, replace it. It doesn't have to be something expensive. With cleaning products, those are very toxic. There's so many natural solutions now that really aren't that expensive. You can use freaking vinegar and water to clean your house with, and that's going to do great. And it doesn't have any chemicals in it. That food, you're going to, anything that's got a pesticide on it is going to be act like estrogen in your body. The meat that you're eating could be pumped full of hormones that are then going into your body and being toxic. So I think those are primary. Is look for the scents, look for the chemicals, and then go into your kitchen and get rid of all your plastic containers. Do not be filling up plastic water bottles. Don't be microwaving anything in plastic that you're going to be eating. That is like super estrogenic. And even if it says BPA free on that container, don't believe it, because if it doesn't have BPA, it's going to have BPB. Is it BP? What's the other one?
Say BPA like, right?
BPA like.
Yeah.
It's going to have bisphenol in it, bisphenol something. And so they've replaced the BPA with a different one, which is actually worse.
Yeah. It still does the same effect.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I think there's things there's some things it's going to be hard to avoid. Like foods, it's hard to avoid. But I think cleaning products, right? You're largely determined. I know everybody loves that great smell and they love their Downy sheets, but those things are problematic.
So
right?
toxic, yeah.
You can, I think one place to take a look is look at your water supply.
The water supply, yes.
So go to ewg.org and do a search on there. And I think you will see a number of potential chemicals that may be a problem in your local water supply. So you put in your zip code and it'll tell you what's in the water supply. And when they look at water and what's legal to have in the water, all these chemicals that are in there are typically you'll find that everything's within the legal range. But when they test these things one at a time against the human body. They do not test the cumulative load on the body. And a lot of these things are estrogenic that are in there. There's a lot of toxins in there that can impact, all kinds of, thyroid signaling, estrogen signaling, and create problems. And there are estrogens and testosterone, estrogens and androgens in the water, right? So
yeah, there's alligators and fish that are becoming asexual because of all the xenoestrogens that are in the water. There's a great book called Estrogeneration by Dr. Anthony J. It's a great read, actually. I interviewed him on my podcast, but that's a great book to read because he goes through all the levels and what has the highest amounts and where we're getting it from and how you can clean up your environment. And he has like 3 different stages of cleaning up your environment. So like the simple version, the really intense version of where you're just going to try and get rid of absolutely everything that could be toxic to you. But yeah, cleaning up your environment, drinking. Once again, alcohol is so glamorized right now for women. It is way more acceptable for women to drink than not drink. And I will tell you, ladies, alcohol will raise your risk of breast cancer more than estrogen replacement will. It is going to be, your liver is going to have a hard time with it. It's estrogenic in and of itself. So, cutting the drinking back to, a couple glasses of wine a week tops is like the most that you should be doing. And I know that's really way easier said than done. I used to be an alcoholic, so I'm not judging, but it is something that's like the number one thing that I see can really affect women and their health is getting rid of the alcohol in a positive way.
And there's a great book by Alex Stewart. It's called Low Tox Life. Alex was on the podcast really early on, but she gives you simple strategies of how to kind of reduce the toxic load. But I think sometimes when we tell people, hey, you got to clean up your environment, they're freaked out. Like, oh my gosh, it's in all this stuff. And what am I going to do? Take things one at a time, right? Yeah. Take it easy, take it slow. When your laundry detergent runs out, get
ones that aren't,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Get something that's, environmentally friendly. I mean, they have these little, different options of now that you can just throw in there that are paper and other natural product ingredients. Think about when you're the smelly thing you throw in to keep the static out. When that runs out, go get some wool balls, put a paper clip on it or a safety pin on it, throw the balls in the dryer. If you want a scent, get your lavender oils and drip them on there. You'll still get a little bit of scent. It's not going to be as toxic as the stuff.
And you're going to resensitize your smells. Like you will find that after about a month of not having those chemicals in your products anymore, the perfumes, you won't be able to handle that smell that you once thought was so great in your Downy Fresh sheets is going to make you feel nauseous when you smell them. It happens to everyone where they're like, oh, now I cannot handle the smell.
Yeah, it's amazing when I'm a runner. So when I go for a run, you can
smell the dryer. Yes.
Yeah, you can smell people like they've been there, because you're like, okay, that's somebody's laundry detergent. That's somebody. And so that somebody was just there. And so if I can smell it and they walked through this path, right, they're living in that 24/7, don't even realize it. And to me, it's like, ugh,
same.
Right.
Yeah.
So clean up the environment. That's step one. Do it easy, filter your water, filter air, change out your cleaning products. You're not going to redo your home necessarily, right? But think about the things that you bring into your home, the cleaning products, the furniture you get, all the things that you bring in, try and get the cleanest versions, filter water, look at what's in your water for sure. Stop the plastics. Any other guidance or advice you'd give somebody right off the bat?
Yeah, I think the other couple steps would obviously be clean up your diet. The diet has to be foundational with the hormones, and don't go automatically to what's the next best diet out there. So many women are jumping on all these fad diets, and it's the exact wrong kind of diet for what their hormones are doing at that time. So be very careful. You want to pick the right way of eating to match with what's going on with your hormones. So if you've got hypothyroidism, you've got adrenal insufficiency, going super low carb, carnivore, fasting all day long, that's not for you. That's going to drag your thyroid and your adrenal system into the ground farther. But if you've got polycystic ovarian syndrome, high estrogens, you're super inflamed and toxic. Yeah, going a little bit lower, fixing that insulin, dropping down the inflammation is going to be really important. And not putting in a lot of sugar and going low carb is going to be great. So you really want to get very specific about how you're eating to match with what you're dealing with your hormones. So testing the hormones, of course, if you can, do whatever you can there. Some people can't afford the Dutch. If that's you, start with blood work, but do it on the right day. Do it on day 21 of a cycle, or 7 days before you typically get your period. And then have somebody that understands the ranges, right? We don't want it to be, there is ideal functional ranges. They could then work with it. And then exactly what Eric was talking about, looking at that full CBC panel. Any doctor will run you a CBC panel with your cholesterols and your blood sugar. And so get that done, because that's free typically. So get it done. That's a great place to start. And then, then you can start looking at gut health, liver health, detoxification health, and go from there.
Yeah. And I think keep it simple, right? Because before you go look, I mean, if you go to see Karen or you come see me, we're going to tell you about the basic stuff anyway. Those are things we're going to want you to do anyway. And from a dietary standpoint, I'd maybe give a little bit different but similar advice. Like, how do you know which? Like, do I do this one? Do I do that one? Before you even worry about do I need carb, low carb, high carb? Think about
just clean up your diet.
Yeah, just eat more.
That can be the first step.
Real food,
absolutely,
right? That's
Eric.
So.
Yes, no, I agree with that.
I think we have these nutrition wars between carnivore is better than vegan and vegan's better than look, the issue is rarely with whole real foods, right? So you can have the argument about organic, non-organic later. First, get all the processed crap down to a limited amount. Then we can start having the conversation, because I see people going, well, I'm still eating a lot of this processed stuff because I'm not, is that toxic with fertile chemicals or pesticides or all that? Look, if you're eating processed food, start there. Right.
Exactly. Yes.
And then we can worry about
step.
Right.
Yes.
Worry about the purity of the stuff, because I guarantee you the packaged food you're eating, because you're worried about which natural food might have chemicals and hormones in it. All that processed food you're eating is chemicals and chemicals. It's like you're jumping over dollar bills to pick up pennies, right? So
yeah, just start with real food. That's it.
Real food.
that's such a great starting point.
Right. Work on real food, get some physical activity, whatever tolerance is. Go for a walk every day, build that up, exercise, work on your sleep fitness, work on your breathing and respiratory fitness, all simple things you can do. Do the things that you can do every day. When the thyroid debacle is out, part 3 of that whole book is all about simple things you can do on your own. And that makes it easier for somebody like Karen or me to help you, because you've already done all these foundational things. So it's great to come see us for help if you need to, but make sure start with the things that you have a lot of control over, don't cost much, and you can do. The other thing I would urge, don't get caught up doing a bunch of blood tests or hormone tests that you don't know how to interpret, or you don't have somebody to interpret, because they are expensive tests. They're really great tests. But if you get a test, you pay for it, and then you try and spend the next 6 to 7 months trying to figure it out, and then you come to see
Dutch.
me.
Oh my gosh.
Come to see me or Karen, and it's a year later, and you're going, hey, I need some help. I did a Dutch test. Okay, that was a year ago,
that
right?
Was a year ago, too late.
So we can glean some stuff from that, and you may still have symptomatology that manages that, but we really don't want to treat you based on who you were a year ago, especially if you've done a bunch of stuff in the meantime, you're not necessarily the same person chemistry wise. So your old tests give us a story, but really when we're going to make some decisions on how to address and how to treat and how to work with you, we really want a little bit up-to-date information. So I often see that people like, I did a GI map, I did this, I did that, I did a vibrant, I did that. And I got all these tests. I'm like, these are from 2019.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I did all the tests and then I couldn't afford to see anybody. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So we can make some decisions on those things, but that's not maybe who you are today. So
actually, my Dutch tests, all my hormone tests that I sell off my website, all come with a 20-minute interpretation session for that reason.
Yeah, because you got to get some data and some information. So, and the Dutch is a really, like every other test, somebody can read it and give, oh, estrogen's high, that's low, but not interpret it well. And I think that's the difference between a good physician and a really good physician is the average physician can just read, that's high, that's low. Okay, well, I didn't need a doctor to tell me that. I can see that on the lab report. What you really want is a good physician to be able to interpret it and say, hey, this is high, but let me explain to you why that's high and how you go about addressing why that's high. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's the difference. Here's your DIM. That's like the answer from every single, not every single, but a lot of practitioners that read a Dutch test. It doesn't matter what it seems to say. It's like, here's the DIM.
Right. And if you did DIM, and we may have a different opinion on this, but if you did DIM, I look at supplementation that you use them strategically, right? I'm trying to accomplish something short term with the DIM, and then I want to get it out of there. If you're on DIM for the last year and a half, maybe we're not addressing, maybe we're not addressing the real issues, and maybe we got some problems, right? So I see a lot of that. Like you've been taking this, you're on DIM for 2 years now. Yeah. Okay. Why?
Or adrenal glandulars.
Yeah. Well, somebody gave it to me and I felt better. And so I'm still taking it. Yeah. But you have all these symptoms and these are probably because you've been taking DIM way too long.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Now look, your androgens are down.
Yeah. I didn't know that could be bad for me.
You've got no estrogen, no testosterone now. So you got to be very careful. Yeah.
So, all right. I'm going to we'll wrap this up, but let's do this. Let's tell everybody where they can find out more about you, like website, social media, podcast.
KarenMartel.com. I have a great hormone quiz that will tell you, possibly it's just a quiz, but it's a great place to start. It's going to give you your top possible hormone imbalances that could be causing you to not be able to lose weight. That's a great little thing. And then my podcast is one of the top rated weight loss podcasts on iTunes. It's called The Other Side of Weight Loss. And I talk a ton about thyroid and hormones and weight loss on all different angles on it over there. And there's over 200 episodes now. It's been going for quite a while. That's a great spot. And then Karen Martel Hormones on all my social media channels.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap this up. So lots of good conversation here. We'll have to do it again because we didn't get finished. So, but that's good. This is why we do the podcast and we have easy conversations and we can talk a little nerdy about stuff. And hopefully some of this stuff helps our listeners and our viewers. So thanks for coming on the podcast. For those who are listening to the podcast, we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you sharing with your friends and family. Go give us a nice rating. I think that they do like 5 stars is like the only option for this podcast, obviously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how could you do less than 5 for this one?
So, only 5 on both of ours. Thank you very much, everyone.
Absolutely. So, all right, that's it for today. Karen, you have yourself a fantastic day, a fantastic weekend, and we'll talk again. Okay.
You bet.